Let me comment on a remark Nadezhda Arbatova made at the beginning when she talked about the interplay between US-Russian relations and EU-Russia relations. Of course, in a certain way, this is true, but on the other hand, it is not as true as you think. When you examine the same question, can relations between NATO and Russia ever be better than relations between the United States and Russia? I think you were on mark. It is very difficult to see that NATO-Russia can move far ahead of EU-Russia, of US-Russia, because, contrary to reality, in Moscow, NATO and US are seen as one and the same thing. But EU and Russia, that is quite a different affair. And let me give you an example. When in the bad old days of the Cold War, Germany and the Soviet Union agreed on the pipeline gas agreement. This almost caused a profound crisis in the Western camp, and people thought that Germany's anchoring in the West was in danger. But we proceeded, and the impact of this historical deal on East-West relations was a long-term and very beneficial for all sides. So it is important to understand that the European nature of European Union and of Russia allow a specific quality of relations and also a different progress. Now, Dimitri Simes, for those of you who were present yesterday morning, he said there are a lot of good things in US-Russia relations, but there are many questions relating to the position of the West in a changing world. I might say there are a lot of good things in EU-Russia relations, but I have to admit there are questions regarding the internal dynamics, political power in the European Union and European Union position in the world. But I would add, the same is true, and you just said it, for Russia. So we have two entities which are more or less convinced that the status quo is something they need to change. And that makes interaction not easy. However, one of the good things in EU-Russia relations seems to me to be that the earlier sense of geopolitical competition between the EU and Russia is not as strong as it used to be, and there is a growing sense of commonality of interest, which require joint or common answers. There is a point which is more important than it sounds. What do we talk about when we talk about EU-Russia relations? We talk about institutions, or we talk about the process in real life. These are two things. Both Both are very important. And as far as the process is concerned, a lot of good things were mentioned yesterday. But institutions are absolutely necessary in order to have firm common ground, to have a basis for common goals and for continuity. Now, the first institutional anchoring ground for the relations was the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, which was agreed in 1994 for 10 years. I don't know whether anybody has ever read the agreement. You would be surprised how many good things are in it. This is the good story. The bad side of the story is a lot was said, but little was implemented. And this lack of implementation had a lot to do with the things Nadezhda just mentioned, which are anchored, or which are Russian problems not settled. We projected a picture of a relationship which required Russia to change over time, and the change didn't take place, in particular in the way the country was administered. So that problem still exists. So when we now negotiate about a follow-up agreement, which of course has to be more ambitious and more modern, we are still faced with a lack of implementation of things which should have been done long ago. And of course, the new follow-up agreement presupposes that Russia has joined the WTO, which has not yet taken place. So these things are interlinked. Now there is a question, and I posed it yesterday: is there, or are there motors which are driving EU-Russia relations with enough political energy? Individual EU countries have shaped a kind of special relationship with Russia. Germany is one of them. France is another. Italy is another. But more and more countries consider their relationship with Russia as something special which needs attention. We have been criticized off and on that we are pursuing a selfish, bilateral national policy with Russia. I'll give you an example that this is not always true. It may be true sometimes. We were fully aware of the political and real significance of visa facilitation. We had just, with great trouble, established a visa-free zone and free travel inside the Schengen community, which was a big step to ask countries to give up border controls. Traditional nation states, not easy. And now we start about reducing visa requirements with Russia, with all these unpredictable things we read about in the papers every day. So there was no consensus to do this. What we did in the early days of the first decade of the century, we examined what flexibility does the Schengen Agreement allow individual members in relation to Russia. Can we reduce fees? Can we facilitate the procedure, etc.? Can we grant certain privileges to students or politicians or business people and all that? And we concluded a bilateral agreement with Russia on visa facilitation, and were inside the EU heavily criticized for breaking solidarity. What happened 2 years later? The EU concluded a visa facilitation agreement building on the ground which we prepared and going further. So I think in moving forward between EU and Russia, it is very important that sometimes when the collective group of EU countries or the organs, the Commission, do not act or cannot act, that individual countries push ahead. And I hope that the German government will continue to, in that role, to be a motor of EU-Russia relations. In recent months, a very important lesson was learned in Moscow about the EU. There are not many principles which define the EU, but one very important principle is solidarity. And the importance of this principle was brought back to Moscow in the context of the Polish, what I call the Polish problem. At the EU-Russia summit in was it Samara? It was quite a shock when Angela Merkel, as then president of the EU, said, "We, the EU, show solidarity with Poland, and we will not allow Poland to be singled out." So this is very important, and it may be one of the reasons why, definitely not the only one, why there has been a new trend in Polish-Russian relations, which is very beneficial for cooperation between Russia and the EU.